In a world where Africans have lost their roots, it has become of vital importance to document our ways. In an effort to reverse the brainwashing of the past, where we were made to believe our ways are demonic, we are pressed to create dignified and respectful platforms to unpack our spiritual ways. Moya, oh light, Moya, oh bright. Welcome to another episode of Moya. Guys, thank you for all the support. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. And remember how you contribute to the channel is by watching the adverts. So please, guys, don't skip the ads. That's how you make sure that Kitso and I just get a little bit of sense in the pocket. So last time we had Dr. Charles Ndabeni here, and that episode was super popular. And what that told us is that you guys want some more history. And soon after Dr. Charles's episode, the book on Mangope actually came out. So I have got the author of the book. Now I'm going to get the pronunciation wrong. After I'd asked, how do you actually say it? Sorry, Boputhatswana things, but Oupa Segalwe, who wrote a book on Mangope. It's on the screen right now. Oupa, thank you so much for coming through.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
And thank you, because African history is so, it's not there, or it's written from a white people's point of view. So we have needed young people to come in and sort of like unpack it to us. And so basically today we want you to unpack Mangope for us. We are sitting,
of course.
We are just gonna listen.
It's true what you say about African history. When I was researching this book, there were moments where I couldn't find certain documents, information locally, be it at the National Library or at the Archive Center in Pretoria. And one day I traveled abroad as part of my other work, and I had free time on my hands, and I decided to pop into a certain library in Harlem, in New York, and I was surprised at what I found there. Documents that you can't find here at home about Boputhatswana, about Kgosi Mangope. So it's very strange that our history is laying somewhere halfway across the world, and we haven't got those documents here at home.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Do you think it's deliberate?
I don't know. It could be because we don't do enough to preserve our history here at home, and other people do it better, or there could be some mischief there. You never know. Yeah.
Okay, so tell us. You went on this journey. Obviously, now you know Kgosi Mangope intimately.
Yeah.
So we basically, your children don't read, you know that. So I brought you here to just tell them the story of Kgosi Mangope, what he did, how he grew up. The things that you put in that book.
Of course. So maybe let me preface it this way and say I come from the same rural village as Kgosi Mangope. I was born there in the mid-80s, long after.
What village?
In Mazwai.
Okay.
He came from a village called Mazwai, just outside Zeerust in the northwest. So growing up there, around about 1994, I must have been 10 years of age or so. There was quite a lot happening at the time. I suppose it was happening all over the country, and in Boputhatswana in particular, because of the push against Homeland systems and the pushback from the authorities within that particular homeland against what was about to happen. So,
do you want to explain to the youth what the Homeland systems were? What push are you talking about?
Yeah. So back in the day under apartheid, there were homelands. It was like little countries within South Africa, enclaves of sorts. And there was about 11 or so of them, but out of the 11, there were 4 that were independent so to speak, in terms of the South African law of the time. And those ones were Boputhatswana, Venda, Transkei, and Ciskei. They were supposedly independent from mainland South Africa. And
so the white apartheid government, what you're saying is the white apartheid government had control over like Gauteng and these other regions. Yeah. They were controlling it, but then there were parts like Venda, Transkei, Boputhatswana, and I don't know what you said.
Ciskei.
Ciskei.
Yes.
That were governed by?
They were governed by Homeland leaders such as Kgosi Mangope, such as Lennox Sebe, and so forth. The idea was to have a whites-only South Africa, and all the black people were kicked out of mainland South Africa, and they were given token independence so as to run their own affairs and preserve their own culture. That was the story that was sold to them, but in reality, it was the balkanization of the black majority in the country. So Boputhatswana was one of those countries. Around the early 1990s, when change started to manifest with the government of F.W. de Klerk unbanning all the political parties that had been banned, like your ANC, PAC, SACP, and them, and releasing political prisoners such as Nelson Mandela and others. There was now a move towards the reincorporation of all of those homelands into mainland South Africa in preparation for the death of apartheid. And that's why in the early 90s you saw the CODESA talks, which were leading towards that. And almost all of the homelands were in unison to say they were going to go and join the movement towards the reincorporation into South Africa, equal rights, multiracial elections, and all of that. But you had the likes of Boputhatswana and Kgosi Mangope pulling in a different direction, saying, no, we would like to maintain our independence and all of that. Now, hence I say, around about 94, there was a whole lot of discussions going on around my home village and in particular in my own household. And the Boputhatswana propaganda was so strong that certain people did not see the point of reincorporating into South Africa. They bought into the idea of remaining independent when everybody else was moving towards democracy. And so in my own household, I grew up in or around conversations like that to say, no, these people, the so-called liberation fighters, are coming here to take away what we had under Boputhatswana and all of that. But the moment I went out and interacted with people in the streets, the conversation took a different direction. The sentiment was the polar opposite of what I had in my own household, to say, no, actually what is about to happen is that we are going to be free, we're going to have equal rights, or enjoy equal rights with our white counterparts and all of that. So I grew up with that contradiction in my mind, such that later on, as an older guy now, I realized that there was a story here that could be told. And I was surprised that no one had taken the trouble to document it. So I took it upon myself to document the story of Kgosi Mangope, particularly his role in the Homeland system and his role around about the transition to democracy and all of that.
So tell us. You're not giving us the story of Kgosi Mangope, but that's why we called you here.
Yeah, so I was making that point to say that's what, got me interested in his story. But let's go back to who he was. First and foremost, he was a very controversial politician. The leader of Boputhatswana, as I said, but in post-democratic South Africa, he was the leader of a political party called the United Christian Democratic Party. He was a career school teacher before he entered the world of politics, but he was also a traditional leader. In my home village, he was the chief, having taken over from his father, who was also named Lucas Mangope. So this Lucas Mangope, who is the subject of this book, Was born in 1923 and grew up as a very naughty boy, taking care of his father's livestock in the outskirts of Motswedi, and getting up to mischief while at it. One story has it that once upon a time, while returning from the woods where he had been tending his father's cattle, he wandered into another village's property and stole watermelons. And his father was cross with him when he found out that, because in him he saw someone who was going to succeed him and be the leader of the community. So it didn't sit well with him that the son of a traditional leader stole from one of the traditional leader's subjects, and he read him the Riot Act, but making it clear to him that you can never, under any circumstances, steal from people that are essentially your own subjects and all of that. But he was raised with a dose of discipline, obviously his father preparing him for his future. But we see him by age 10 switching from being a head boy and going to school now. There was a missionary school there in Motswedi, run by some white people from Germany, and that's where he was introduced to education at an elementary level. But even before then, he had undergone initiation, the traditional way of education. And having finished his schooling at that level, his father then sent him off to Rosettenville. There used to be a school there called St. Peter's Secondary School. It's famous for having produced some of the country's most renowned intellectuals in politics, in music, in law. People like Oupa Segalwe went there. People like Skiam Pahlele went there.
So it was quite woke.
Yes. You had people like Mr. Andrew Mlangeni. O.R. Tambo also went there, and so forth. So it's a whole list of them. So he was among the young men at the time who went to study at St. Peter's. And I say in the book, it's probable that his father chose that school for him because he himself had been exposed to missionary education, having went to Lovedale in Alice in the Eastern Cape. So at St. Peter's, that's where we see Kgosi Mangope, starting to develop as a leader even at that age, because his peers and the staff at school elected him prefect at that age, and he shouldered a responsibility to take care of the residences, in a sense that he had to maintain law and order in those kind of settings. And he did quite well at school back then. This is now in the 40s. And one of the things that he experienced there, of course, like most learners, was that he was bullied. And this is something I learned from Ntate Mlangeni himself when I sat down with him a few years back, is that township kids or boys who came from the township were very hard on their counterparts who came from rural areas like Kgosi Mangope. They saw them as this socially awkward beings who didn't know much about anything and so forth. So they had derogatory names that they referred them with, like Mohu,
basically.
Yes, something like that. But despite that rather unwelcoming environment, he did quite well in his studies. And you see in some of the testimonials that he got from a one-time headmaster of that school, that he spoke very well of him, that he was very good, well-disciplined, hence he was given that role of prefect. But later on, he returns home, and this is now when his dad is much older, and he's sickly, and he's probably in his 80s and so forth. So he starts imagining life beyond himself. This is to say, he was frail, he was getting frail and all of that. So he takes his son onto something that we call these days job shadowing. So he starts sharing his chiefly duties with him in the village, essentially showing him the ropes, and even around about that time, he also sends him off to Botswana to another chief who is a relative of theirs to learn the mechanics of traditional leadership.
What's the difference between Boputhatswana and Botswana?
So Botswana was an independent country. It is still independent, but back in the day it was under the authority of the UK monarchy. That's why they call it the British Protectorate at some point. Yes, and so. The whole story about the scramble for Africa when the Europeans came here and apportioned the continent and shared it amongst themselves. So one of Kgosi Mangope's arguments, which is an argument he brought up at CODESA, was that Botswana and South Africa and Boputhatswana are one. The border was imposed and all of that. And when he made that argument, that's when he was arguing against independence, saying rather than reincorporating into mainland South Africa, I'd rather go and match with Botswana and all of it. But of course, that did not happen. So the two countries not only share a border, they also share culture, language. Yes,
exactly.
That kind of thing. So he sent, that is his father, sent Kgosi Mangope over to Botswana to go and learn about traditional leadership and the Botswana customs, traditions, and all of that. All of this preparing him for what laid in wait. And of course, then his father passes away, and Kgosi Mangope is now in pole position to succeed his father, but it's not that simple.
How old is he at this?
He's in his 30s, about 35 years of age, but there's a challenger to the throne. Here's why there was a challenger. Kgosi Mangope's father was himself a regent. He was a regent. In other words, he was holding the fort for somebody else.
Yes.
At the point of assuming that role, the rightful heir, a man named Rakhaje, was very young of age but senior in rank.
Yes.
So it was taken for granted that he would yield to Rakhaje once he was of mature age. But that did not happen. According to some of the official government reports from back in the day that I have read, having become comfortable in office, he then used his power to banish Rakhaje and his family from Motswedi. And Rakhaje lived in Dobsonville. That's where he's buried. He never claimed his or took his rightful place on the throne. And as a result, when Kgosi Mangope Sr. passes away, there was this contestation between Kgosi Mangope, the subject of this book, and Rakhaje. And the government of the time had powers to do as they pleased in respect of traditional leadership. They could install whoever they wanted or remove whoever they wanted. The commissioner of natives had those kind of powers. And so before Kgosi Mangope could succeed his father, the government sent an ethnologist to Motswedi to go and investigate this issue of succession. And that ethnologist went there and produced two reports. The first report was in support of Rakhaje taking his rightful place on the throne. But a subsequent report reversed all of that after it was found out that when he was in this part of the country, which is Gauteng today, working in the mines and all of that, he got exposed to ANC politics. And at the time, the government didn't want to hear anything about the ANC and all of that. So that's how Rakhaje then fell off, because it was feared that he would then use Motswedi to practice his ANC politics and, carry on with a counter-offensive against what the government wanted to achieve. And that's how Kgosi Mangope then took the role of traditional leadership, continuing under his father, who was himself believed to be more aligned to the government. For instance, in 1958-59, there was a rebellion in the part of Zeerust, in villages like the Nukana, Motswedi, Khopane, and so forth, against pass laws. Yes. People were setting alight their pass books and all of that because they rejected that whole concept. But Kgosi Mangope's father was seen as one who was in favor of people carrying pass laws and pass books and so forth, and people rebelled against him. In one incident, they actually attacked his household, stoning it, breaking things and all of that, expressing their anger in relation to the position they believed he held in respect of that whole debate. So anyway, Kgosi Mangope then succeeds his father in those circumstances, and he got inaugurated as chief in 1959, his father having passed away the year before. And I suppose he was inaugurated into that role at the right time. He was in the right place at the right time, because a year or two later, the government starts building up in preparation for what we will see later as the independence of Homelands. They introduce a number of laws that bring about a hierarchy of governance system that starts at the level of tribal authorities, and then the next tier is the regional authorities. The regional authority structure is made up of chiefs from different tribal authorities, in other words, chiefs from various villages. And then regional authorities then make up the last level, which is called territorial authorities. So in the Boputhatswana area, you had those tribal authorities, and then you had the regional authorities, and then you had what was called Tswana Territorial Authority, or TTA. And you see the build-up then to what then becomes self-governance. So before independence, there was self-governance. In fact, I said earlier to you that some of these homelands were self-governing. It's because they didn't take up independence when the four decided to take things a notch up. So you see Kgosi Mangope rising through the ranks there, in coming from Motswedi Tribal Authority, and then being an influential figure in the Zeerust Regional Authority, such that he was made a deputy chairperson of the Tswana Territorial Authority, deputizing a gentleman called Didimane Pilani, who was the chief of the Bakhatla outside Rustenburg near Pilanesberg. So now we are beyond the 60s. Now we are in the 70s, early 70s. There's a decision to say, no, we need to get to independence because this system is not working for us. It's a debate that is taking place within that setting among all of those role players. And that's when you see the birth of political parties, because before then, it was just a team or a group of traditional leaders working together collectively to govern that territory. But in the 70s, early 70s, you see the introduction of political parties. Kgosi Mangope was in the Boputhatswana National Party. And then there was another political party called Oupa Segalwe. And then Kgosi Mangope being the leader of that particular political party. His party won the first elections that were held there to govern the self-governing territory called Boputhatswana at the time. And then later on, there are rows and ructions within this Boputhatswana National Party, and then he breaks away to form a splinter called the Boputhatswana Democratic Party. And you see, because of his popularity and I suppose his charisma, a huge chunk of members of Boputhatswana National Party then follow him, and such that this party was weakened, which was governing that territory. But he remained the leader of that territory, weakened by the fact that he did not have a popular mandate. The elections he won was under this old political party. This one is running government, but it was not elected. So he later contests elections under this umbrella, and then he wins, of course. And that's now when we are building up towards independence. And we see the party that he left behind, Boputhatswana National Party and the Opposition Party, forging a coalition of sort, or a merger rather. They merged to try and challenge the might of the Boputhatswana Democratic Party, but still nothing happens. Kgosi Mangope was just too strong. And then it is at that point then that he leads this territory to token independence in 1977, becoming the independent Boputhatswana that we have come to know, following in the footsteps of Transkei, which was the first of the homelands to take independence, or accept independence. Yes.
So then what, because when we had the session, the last session about Mangope, we heard some amazing things he did.
Yeah.
So do you want to go into those?
Yeah, so this is now post the 6th of December 1977. That's the date on which Boputhatswana became independent. And it would remain independent like that until March 1994. But in between, a whole lot of things happened. Maybe before I deal with that, let me say this, that Kgosi Mangope as a politician and as a person is a very controversial figure.
Yes.
And his legacy is very divisive. You know, you find passionate arguments on either side. So on the one extreme, you have people who held him in the highest esteem because they say he was this developmentalist, this visionary, this unparalleled leader when it comes to what they refer to as positive things that came out of Boputhatswana. They talk of the infrastructure expansion that we saw there. You know, if you think about it, the Bob TVs of this world, the Radio Bob of this world, you have institutions such as Mabana. Those are responsible for, or they produced some of the people who I consider among the backbone of the entertainment industry in South Africa. If you think about it, some of the disc jocks that are on Metro and everywhere, some of them started in Boputhatswana. Musicians, actors, actresses, they come from Boputhatswana, an institution called Mabana. But it's more than that. You go there, they had shopping malls, they had state-of-the-art government buildings, they had airports, they had all of these things. But then you have another school of thought that says, look, it's fine, there were all of those things and more, but as far as we are concerned, those were essentially fruits of a poison tree, in a sense that Boputhatswana was an extension of apartheid. The law that gave birth to Boputhatswana was passed in an apartheid parliament in Cape Town. So it's difficult for us to heap praises on Boputhatswana and Kgosi Mangope for all of those developments, because...
Are they like saying he's a white capital monopoly creation?
They are essentially saying he was a puppet of the apartheid regime. Because, as I say, Boputhatswana existed on the strength of a piece of legislation passed by the South African Parliament. So you find those kind of arguments, and that's why people who speak highly of him for all of that infrastructure development are seen as revisionists of history. In fact, this reminds me of that whole debate around what Helen Zille said about Kgosi colonialism and apartheid to say, no, it wasn't all bad because it brought us infrastructure and all of that. If you recall, there was quite a lot of heated debates around that on social media, on radio, and all of that, with some people agreeing with her, others saying it's an insult. So it's that kind of, debate.
So it's kind of like that, the field and the house slaves.
Yeah. And in the main, my own opinion is that it is influenced by what people experience on the ground, because in 1994 there was a lot of promise to say this is a better life for you, it's coming, and all of that. And when the government of the day struggles to live up to those expectations, people get disillusioned with it and they start looking back. That's when you start seeing this nostalgia, the Boputhatswana homesickness coming into sharp focus. A lot of it, you will observe it round about the elections, when people go around campaigning for votes and all of that. When journalists interact with people on the ground, that's when you hear the sentiment coming up to say, no, actually life used to be better back then. Right now we don't have roads, we don't have water, we don't have this and that and all of that. But I don't think it's a fair comparison to compare the situation now and then, because the environment is different altogether. But again, some of the people who are critical of Kgosi Mangope refer to the repression that happened in Boputhatswana in the dying days of apartheid. Because, as I said earlier, he was opposed to reincorporating into South Africa. Reincorporation meant allowing for free political activity in Boputhatswana, allowing all the political parties that were going to run for public office to canvass for votes in Boputhatswana and all. He didn't want any of that. And then when he took platforms, he would say there won't be any elections in Boputhatswana. And in saying so, he made it look as though he was speaking on behalf of the vast majority of the people of Boputhatswana. But the situation on the ground was telling a different story, in a sense that there was a pushback, there was dissent from the people on the ground. And to the extent that there was dissent, it was met with brute force from the side of the Boputhatswana police. And if you read the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report, you will see how some of those people felt the wrath of the government of Kgosi Mangope and all of that. But that's not where the story ends. Other people say he was just like a regular politician, in a sense that there was corruption in Boputhatswana on a big scale. And you see this when you read the Square Commission report. So when the ANC came into government in 1994, with Ntate Pupo Molefe as the Premier of the Northwest,
Yes.
he established a commission of inquiry to look into allegations of corruption under Boputhatswana. And the target of that commission, in my opinion, was Kgosi Mangope. Although, in the terms of reference, they would say, no, it was yes. And other people have said that he was being punished for the stance he took when everybody else was going this way. He was going against the grain, because he was the only Homeland leader who was investigated in those kind of terms. Nobody else was held to account. And
so the system sorted him out.
Yes, that's the view, and to an extent I agree with that. So that commission was chaired by a future Constitutional Court judge, Justice Louis Square, as its name suggests. The Square Commission emerged with scathing findings against Kgosi Mangope, saying that, for instance, he had turned the coffers of the Boputhatswana government into his personal piggy bank, and he had also reached into the coffers of the Bahurutsi Bomanyani, the traditional community that he was the leader of. Because in Motswedi, collectively, we own another piece of land some 80 kilometers away, and there was a mine there, because some time ago they discovered that there were deposits of chrome under that land, and those mining activities yielded royalties that were supposed to assist Mazwai to develop. But as the Square Commission found out, Kgosi Mangope had reached into those coffers for himself, because those funds were being deposited into a bank account, and he was the only person who had the keys to that bank account, as found by the Square Commission of Inquiry. It was so serious that the government of the day used those findings to press charges of fraud and theft against him, and he didn't survive that prosecution. He was convicted and sentenced. So his critics raised those things to say, you say this person was a model politician because you had Radio Bob, you had this and that, you had law and order, you had this and that, but you turn a blind eye to these things. And that is what precisely divides opinion about him.
But doesn't the work he did speak for itself? Because you can argue all you want, but the reality is that in that time, there were working things, there was infrastructures, there were international schools, there were state-of-the-art institutions, so...
It does. I mean, to this day, some of that infrastructure is in use, and some people will even go as far as to argue that the new government hasn't built anything of that level. You know, you talk of the SABC building that is there. You talk of the recording studios in Mahikeng, which are said to be world class.
Yes.
You talk of this Mabana concept, which we find in Mafikeng, in Rustenburg, in Tabanchu, which used to belong to Boputhatswana, but now it's in the Free State. In Taung, I think there were 5 such centers that kept the kids away from the streets, developed the arts, anything in the arts, whether you're talking fine arts, you're talking dance, you're talking gymnastics, you're talking music, drama, and all of that. You could get all of that from those centers. And a whole lot of other things, schools, public health facilities, and so forth. So those things are there, and I think he should be given credit for all of that. But in the same vein, that the views of those who say, yes, we see all of those things, but they were not, for us, they were, as I said earlier, fruits of a poison tree. We shouldn't discount those kind of things.
They saw him as a sellout.
Yes, essentially.
That is so deep.
Yeah. So that was Kgosi Mangope. But in the book, his story does not end with the dying of Boputhatswana or his conviction and sentencing. It goes beyond, because you see.
So the sentencing, then what happened? Did he go to jail?
No.
What happened?
So he was of ripe age at the time. I think he was in his 70s, and when I spoke to Ndate Pupo Molefe, he told me that their intention was not to see him rot in jail because of his age.
Impress the whites.
He says they just wanted to hold him to account, and he says they spoke to the prosecution at the time to say, look, our intention was just to address these things, because he says what gave birth to the commission was complaints from the ground, from people in Boputhatswana. So the court did not sentence him to direct imprisonment. They gave him concurrent suspended jail terms on condition that he pays a fine. So he paid a fine upwards of 2 million rand to stay out of jail, and that's how he survived, politically and otherwise, because you see him a couple of years later reinventing himself, rebranding the party that ran Boputhatswana, and then reintroducing it as the UCDP, and then contesting elections for the first time in 1999. And aiming for the ANC. I think he still had this thing in mind that he has a lot of support. He thought he was going to win the election, at least in the Northwest, to because that was his stronghold. But the ANC was very strong there.
Yeah.
It won the 99 elections by a landslide. So in the legislature in the Northwest, you have about 33 seats in total. Kgosi Mangope's party, the UCDP, was only able to win 3 of the 33. The other seat went to the predecessor of the DA. It was called the Democratic Party. It won 1 seat, and the rest went to the ANC. And when his party won the 3 seats, it toppled the DP, the Democratic Party, because until then the Democratic Party was the official opposition. So he led the official opposition in the Northwest between 1999 and 2004. Yeah, 1999 and 2009. Yes, for 2 successive terms with that slender caucus. And then after that, then things went pear-shaped, because around about 2009, his party was then engulfed in internal battles for leadership, because there was he was being contested from within. People saying he's an autocrat within his own political party. He's a dictator and all of that. There's no internal democracy because the constitution of the party provided for a congress every 3 years, at which congress there should be a leadership contest. But there was never any contest throughout his time at the helm in post-apartheid South Africa, because as some of them told me, at Congress just before an election took place, a loyalist of his would just rise from the floor and say, look, I'm happy with Kgosi Mangope's leadership. I don't think it's necessary for us to go to elections. And a huge number of them would say, we agree, we agree. And this left those who wanted to contest him dejected and all of that. And in the long run, this thing caused turmoil within the party. And then you will see him firing certain people, including his own sister.
Sounds like EFF. Yes, I'm listening.
Yeah, so he fires some of the top leaders of the party because he felt that they were gunning for him. They go to court, they win the case against him. Having been reinstated, then they charge him and take him through disciplinary processes. Now, this is a man who had always been a leader. He had always been the leader of that party since 1972 when he led a breakaway group from Boputhatswana National Party. So he found himself in an unfamiliar territory now. He's been deposed within his political party. He must just be an ordinary member. And that's when he quit politics for good. He was enraged by what happened. But he was heartbroken because among those people that were instrumental in kicking him out were one, his most trusted leader of the party, a person he had considered a successor of his whenever it is he was going to call it quits, a gentleman named Sipho Mfundisi. But beyond Mr. Mfundisi, there was May Ipusenditsitelo, his only surviving sibling. So he felt that these people who were close to him backstabbed him, and he left the UCDP and went to sit at home very angry and bitter.
And that was it? That
was it. And from then he started falling ill. He became frail until he passed away in 2018.
Oh, it's just now, actually.
Yeah. So his story is very sad in many respects. I mean, this is a person who was toppled from leadership positions 3 times in his political career. The first time was in 1988 when a group of disgruntled soldiers within the Boputhatswana Defense Force teamed up with a political nemesis of his, a man who was known as Rocky Malebana Metsing, to engineer a military coup, which turned very violent because when they arrested him, they had guns pointed at him. They captured him in the very early hours of the morning. He's still in his pajamas, he's barefoot, and then they are prodding him with these rifles, taking him to a nearby stadium where he was to be held captive for hours while his captors prepared to take over government. Fortunately, he was saved by the government of the day of P.W. Botha, and they reinstated him. But a few years down the line, we see him being toppled again in another coup, this time a soft coup engineered by the ANC and the National Party. This is in 1994. And that's when everything collapses. And then for the third time now, he gets toppled within his own political party. And so he went through the most politically, especially when you consider other things that happened, like the Square Commission and the court case that followed. But even in his personal life, away from the politics, there was always drama, there was heartbreak, there was all sorts of things. 3 of his sisters, his siblings, died under very violent circumstances, killed by their own children and a nephew, in 1991 and 1992. And 2 of his children died under very violent circumstances. The one, according to official information from the police, plunged to his death at his place of residence. He used to live in Morningside, in Sandton. He lived in a block of apartments, and he was on the 3rd floor. And he fell to his death in 1998. Another son, was stabbed to death in Mazwai at the beer hall. So he has lived with all of these things. And as the family patriarch, he tended to bottle it up and try to be there for everyone, seldom showing his own heartache and all of that.
What is so sad about this conversation is it sounds as if this was a big African hero.
Yeah.
And if his funeral was now in 2018, it's something I should know.
Yeah. Well, there was a lot of politics around his funeral, because in the Northwest at the time, I think the premier was Date Suprama Humapelo. He wrote a letter to then President Jacob Zuma requesting that Kgosi Mangope be accorded an official funeral. But that was not to be. President Zuma did not approve that, and then he had a rather ordinary funeral. And this raised eyebrows among some people, because they could not understand why, for instance, if later you had the likes of F.W. de Klerk, the likes of Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi being offered official funerals at state expense like that. Why would he not? But I put it down to that frosty nature of his relationship with the ANC, which is as old as age. I think he was being punished for the stance he took at Codesa and all of that. So that's why it was more on the down low in terms of the prestige that normally comes with this kind of funerals, or the send-offs of people in political office or of political renown.
Is this not how we fail ourselves as African people?
I think, politics has a tendency to get in the way, and sometimes in the view of political players, political sins are not easy to forgive,
Nna ke makatsa hore ke rona fela ra paisana. Ha bone Makgowa etsa these things that where Popo Molefe is now the one there going to prosecute another black leader. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You never, all the atrocities that white people have done, you never even seen a white person call out Hitler.
Yeah. In fact, there were 2 commissions that were established to look into his alleged conduct. Apart from the Square Commission, we had the Tebot Commission, which focused on the violence that took place in Boputhatswana, particularly in Mmabatho, in March 1994, you may have heard the story of how the AWB, that paramilitary outfit of Eugene Tarablanche.
That picture with the soldiers who got shot in the car.
Yeah.
Okay, can you give us because the viewers are quite young, so they don't actually have context of anything.
Of course. So when Kgosi Mangope refused to budge when he was being persuaded to allow for free political activity in Boputhatswana ahead of the April 27, 1994 elections, there was a lot of, unrest within Boputhatswana, many areas of Boputhatswana. But for now, I'm referring to what happened in the Mmabatho area, which was the capital, of Boputhatswana. So the civil servants in Boputhatswana were suspicious that they might lose their pensions because increasingly reincorporation into mainland South Africa was becoming inevitable. So they were worried that their pensions were going to be lost and all of that. So they started, protesting in Mmabatho, requesting that they be given their life savings so that when the reincorporation occurs, they are not left worse off. And Kgosi Mangope was opposed to that because in his view, Boputhatswana was going to remain independent beyond 1994 and so forth. So that's what sparked that unrest.
That edginess.
Already, the situation was on a knife edge, but when they rose and did all of that, things fell out of hand, such that you saw in Mmabatho there's a huge shopping complex there called Mega City in the heart of Mmabatho. People started looting, helping themselves to all sorts of things, from groceries to furniture items and all of that. And the law enforcement struggling to maintain law and order there. But then that served as a rallying call. It created the environment for all of those who were opposed to the Homeland to rise, and push back against Kgosi Mangope and all of that. And now the protesters were trying to persuade even law enforcement, like the police, to join in on all of that, to say we are all going to benefit if this government collapses. The students from the University of Boputhatswana also played a huge role in terms of that rebellion at the time. And then when Kgosi Mangope saw that he was losing control, he sought the assistance of Constant Viljoen, who was in charge of a troop of commandos. He had served in the South African Army before, so he essentially came out of retirement and used those commandos to sort of assist Kgosi Mangope to maintain law and order there. And Eugene Tarablanche also entered the fray. He alleged that Kgosi Mangope had invited him to come and assist, but Kgosi Mangope denied that he invited him. In fact, he says he told him to stay away and not come because he was aware that his involvement was going to aggravate
the plans.
Yes. So anyway, Tarablanche went in uninvited, and when his troops were being driven out of Mafikeng, they started shooting randomly at protesters, and that's what caused that confrontation between the AWB and the Boputhatswana police and defense force. In fact, the picture that you refer to, where you see three members of the AWB slumping against a blue Mercedes-Benz, not far from the police headquarters, the current police headquarters in Mafikeng, called TTA. The police officer that was shooting at them also comes from the same village as Kgosi Mangope and I. And at some point, he was part of Kgosi Mangope's security detail. So he noticed the confrontation between the people and the AWB. When the AWB was shooting at unarmed civilians took it upon himself to intervene. And then he exchanged fire with them, and then it seems like the driver was hit, and that's when they pulled over. And upon pulling over, then he went to shoot them at point blank range with journalists watching. Yeah.
Whoa.
It was very bloody uprising in Mafikeng, but that's what led to Kgosi Mangope's government collapsing.
That moment.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much for all this information. I don't even know where we stand now, but it sounds like any great leader, because there's good and bad in everybody, and it's especially when you're brilliant and it becomes extreme.
That's the view of some people. I told you of the two extremes, those who are this side and those who are that side, but you then have those who sit in the middle who say, look, he was an imperfect leader that was trying. Yeah. So you need to cut him some slack. But I suppose all of these views are correct in one way or the other. He was all of those things and more.
Personally, I feel like the Botswana people need to put Kgosi Mangope where he belongs and celebrate, And the fact that we didn't know about his funeral is really sad. And the legacy, which is why your book is so important, is that white people capture their own history and all their heroes, and we know everything, but we almost lost a hero now.
Yeah, that's exactly what led me to write this story, because I consume a lot of domestic political literature, and I have noticed that increasingly we write more about the role of people who played a leading part in the struggle for the emancipation of black people. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. It's okay. People are more likely to pick up a book about a heroic, intervention and all of that. But I'm of the strong view that we do all of this work, package all of these books and all of that for posterity, so as to say those who will come after us should know where we come from as a people. Now, I was saying at the launch of the book the other day that if this was a picture puzzle and we're leaving it for those who will come after us to be able to make sense of their heritage, then this picture puzzle should have all the pieces in place. If we have missing pieces, they will lose the context. And that's why all of the stories need to be told, irrespective of how we view the subject.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Especially in taking the time to write this history, because, like you say, the importance of it.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. There we have it, guys. Moya o light, Moya o bright. Remember to watch all the adverts, please. And please like, share, and subscribe. We'll see you again next time.
Who are you when all you were has been diluted by lies and white lines cancelling out all that which has been written of your history? Why do you look at yourself as a mystery? Doesn't the sun shine because you open your eyes? Doesn't the moon stay situated within the same stars your DNA sparkles off? Your spirit knows that surely corner into e off. Buza umoya so you may return to being well off. Because spiritually you are rich, yet your ancestors cry because you are out of reach. But yours is to command all elements while God takes inspiration from the very mirror she looked at to become. Remember who you are and never finish just when they think that with you they are done.